Thank you all for joining the first Melanated Mondays of 2022. This month's theme is critical race theory, which has been in the news a lot recently, despite the fact that a ton of people don't really know what it is. So if this is your first time hearing about CRT or your millionth time hearing about CRT, and it's worth having a little bit of a brush up on the subject, critical race theory, or CRT for short, is a cross-disciplinary intellectual and social movement of civil rights scholars, lawyers, and activists. One of the landmark cases that kind of led to our understanding of critical race theory as it exists now dealt with how Black women experience sexual harassment. The unique experience of harassment that Black women were experiencing was not just a manifestation of misogyny, it was a manifestation of racism. And as such, one of the bedrock theoretical frameworks for CRT is intersectionality, which of course is one of the bedrock theoretical frameworks for how BRTW approaches art making. And that leads us very smoothly into Black Revolutionary Theater Workshop. Our mission is to use theater and its components, narrative, and performance to disrupt anti-Blackness wheresoever we encounter it. We recognize that we live in a world that deals with economic, social, educational, healthcare, housing, and political injustice that faces our community. And BRTW aims to tackle the issues that impact us while becoming a beacon for Black opportunity within the arts. One of the programs that we use to pursue that mission is this very program, Melanated Mondays, a monthly writing and performance salon highlighting a different theme at the intersection of Black justice and civic engagement. And of course, this month's theme is CRT. Now, if you've been with us for, goodness gracious, 3 years now, you might know that Melanated Mondays usually has a guest speaker. We did have a guest speaker lined up, and one of the downsides of coordinating guest speakers in a time of a pandemic is sometimes things happen, arrangements fall through. We are wishing that person the absolute best. And this month, we're just going to try and have a conversation about CRT and the arts right after this. And next month, we hope to get back to you with a speaker as usual. We are really grateful to have this amazing group of artists who are going to share these pieces with you this evening. These artists include Donnell Cole-Price, who I think has officially won the award for being Melanated Mondays' most consistent player of all time. I think even including producers, writers, I think we got to get you a crown, you won. We also have Ekemini Ekpo, and I think we have our newest player, but certainly deeply appreciated, Jyreika Guest. And of course, BRTW producers, Mieko Gavia and Tim Craig. Now, just because you're seeing artists on the screen doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't people who are doing hard work behind the scenes. And we are also really grateful to Kira DeGudre, who is our live stream producer. And if you happen to catch Melanated Mondays in person back in the day when it wasn't deeply terrifying and anxiety inducing to do that, you may have noticed her then. She was handling the audio and she's doing something very similar now. And we are also deeply grateful to Meredith King, who is the line producer for Melanated Mondays. And if you are an actor or a writer and you are looking for employment opportunities because you know that your labor is valuable and you deserve to get paid for that labor, you are invited to submit for any opportunities with BRTW. Actors get paid $20 an hour. Writers usually get paid a flat rate, or if they're in a lab, they also get paid $20 an hour. If they're in a fellowship, then that's a flat rate because we're also extending professional development and things like that. But we want to make sure that Black creatives know that their labor is valuable, that their needs should be honored operationally and strategically in the organizational direction of any organization that's going to be profiting from your labor. And most importantly, we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to represent your community faithfully. So thank you all for your time. And with no further ado, let's get into this month's Melanated Mondays.
Madonna Whore by H. Harvey. Audra will be read by Mieko. Wardell will be read by Tim. Sam will be read by Jyreika, and stage directions will be read by Ekemini. A man sits behind a desk. Another official stands nearby. Audra enters.
Audra!
He stands to greet her.
President Crawford.
Audra, please. Wardell.
Please, Mr. President. It's customary to use honorifics with lawyers present.
Audra.
Sam.
So, it's not a social call.
You don't say.
It's just...
The university has been made aware of your recent legal troubles.
We'd like to extend some options in light of these unpleasantries.
Unpleasantries? It's as if harassment garners the same concern as a traffic ticket.
Oh, of course not.
However,
it's not my intention to diminish the nature of these incidents.
Of course not, but since it's not a social call.
We have reason to anticipate escalation.
Have they contacted you?
That is privileged information.
Privileged? I'm being harassed. If it comes to my place of employment, I have a right to know.
Audra, we understand that
Have reason to believe that
you have an active social life.
you have every right to you engage in activities outside of the university
to explore any kind of aspect.
The university does not discriminate against any racial, sexual, or
of course
religious
not.
Identity.
What are you saying?
Sam?
The university has received compelling evidence that there is a video recording of you engaging in behavior unbecoming of the university.
Unbecoming behavior? What am I doing? Drinking at a college party?
Not quite.
And what the fuck is it?
We anticipate that this video recording is currently being shopped around to various press outlets.
Press outlet?
We've discussed it with legal counsel and we're prepared to make arrangements.
The board has been apprised of the situation.
Feel like apprising me?
In light of your sensitive situation, we're prepared to offer you an emergency leave.
We're halfway through the spring semester. I have 2 undergraduate.
We've vetted some alternative instructors, a wonderful adjunct who's ready for
the graduate seminar.
Yes, we feel like the remaining gender, sexuality studies, and Africana studies faculty can share responsibility for the remainder of the curriculum.
I am good at my job.
Oh no, we're not disputing that.
The hell you're not? Every time I'm invited on television, radio.
The university is aware of your personal and professional achievements.
And this school profits from those personal and professional achievements to the tune of millions.
It's a sex tape, Audra.
What?
The university has received compelling evidence that a person or group will release graphic footage of you engaging in sexual acts with another woman.
I didn't.
While the university has no public position on your sexual proclivities, sexual orientation, or behavior, the moral code does grant institutional flexibility in handling your position in the event that you engage in public acts of depravity.
It's not a moral judgment, Audra. It's just us taking
care.
It's
the explicit wording of the morals clause,
which is nearly 200 years old.
The office of the president and the board have discretion over situations such as these, and therefore
just
have
a concern, Audra, for you.
This is bullshit.
Audra.
It shouldn't fucking matter if I did, but I don't happen to film my...
I would avoid refuting the evidence until...
Fuck you, Sam. I don't have to...
I don't know what I was seeing at first, but it's very...
explicit.
If it's a forgery, it's
convincing.
Show it to me.
The university is at liberty to withhold this.
Wardell, I can't go home. I am sleeping on my best friend's couch. I have press on my ass dissecting tweets to determine whether I should be subjected to the horrors contained within them, or if I'm the new poster child for liberal snowflake overreaction. If you called me into your office to fire me while you hide behind your lawyer, at least show me why. You owe me that much.
Wardell types on his laptop and turns it towards her. We hear just enough.
How long is this leave?
It's a fully paid emergency leave to cover the remainder of the semester and summer. The president's office, the board, and legal counsel have 4 semesters to determine permanent action.
Which should be ample time for me to tuck my tail between my legs, find alternative employment, and submit a letter of resignation.
There is a certain neatness to that course of action.
And if I press charges?
You'll find that the university has every right to this course of action and, in accordance to the morality cause, can end your employment without leave, paid or otherwise.
Noted. But I meant against her.
The video seems to depict entirely consensual encounter.
It doesn't matter who I consent to fuck on my own goddamn time. I didn't consent to being filmed.
Audra, you're very sensitive to how trying this situation must be for you. But the morality clause technically doesn't include provisions about such delicate matters.
Delicate matters? Do you mean consent, Wardell?
The university is pursuing the gentlest course of action. It doesn't have to.
Sam extends an envelope towards Audra. She takes it. He holds on to the edge.
Your leave is effective immediately.
Audra,
Sam releases the envelope.
I'm so sorry. It's just...
Fuck you.
End.
Thank you to our wonderful performers, Tim Craig, Mieko Gavia, Jyreika Guest, and Ekemini Ekpo. Our next piece, Allies Matter by Mieko Gavia, will be performed by Ekemini Ekpo reading Tamika, Tim Craig reading Charles, Donnell Cole-Price reading Manspreader, Mieko Gavia reading Hippie, Jyreika Guest reading Woman, and I'll be reading stage directions. Scene: a space similar to Brooklyn Commons, chairs in a circle, several white progressives in BLM shirts. There's an easel with paper on it, one Black woman with a BLM shirt and clipboard, khakis.
Hi, everyone. Settle down, please. We're about to start. Just a reminder that we do have vegan, gluten-free bran muffins and conflict-free bananas in the back if you get peckish.
White man in locks gets up excitedly for muffins.
So, first off, I want to thank you all for coming to our first ever Ally Boot Camp.
A white man dressed similarly to her, also carrying a clipboard, pops up. He's super preppy, except for a high-placed earring and several colorful, stretchy bracelets.
Hi, everyone. My name is Charles. I'm a queer Caucasian American. I go by the pronouns he, him, and his.
And I'm Tamika. I identify as Haitian American. I go by the pronoun she, her, hers, and my sexuality is none of your goddamn business.
Great.
Great.
So today we're here to give an interview, an intensive rundown of Black ally theory, best practices, tactics, and a quick fact, FAQ.
Now, to start off, who knows what the word ally means? Come on, don't be shy. Let's popcorn it.
She scans the crowd, picks out a guy manspreading in his seat.
Yes, you there, in a proud state of display.
A person who is down with the cause.
Okay. Anyone else?
Charles quickly scribbles "down with the cause" on the easel/whiteboard.
Ooh, they identify with the oppressed and not the oppressor.
Yes. I mean, that's a place to start, but
Charles, immersed, automatically writes that down too.
Doesn't see race?
wait, wait,
Doesn't see gender.
stop.
Doesn't see species.
No, seriously, stop.
No, seriously, stop.
Charles,
Oh, sorry. Let's all just calm down.
Sorry.
okay. So, this is actually a good learning opportunity. First off, I appreciate your enthusiasm. I always think of ally as a verb and not a title. You have to constantly ally yourself with marginalized groups. In fact, that's one of the dictionary definitions of ally.
The word ally comes from the Latin allegori, meaning to bind. So we're binding together, right?
That's right. And the modern definition is a state formally cooperating with another for a military or other purpose, typically by treaty. Now, I'm not going to make you all sign a treaty because what we marginalized people need you to do is never static. It's going to change based on circumstances that we can't always predict. But the key word here is cooperating. We have to be in cooperation with each other. The second definition, my favorite, is to combine or unite a resource or commodity with another for mutual benefit. Again, we're combining, yeah, coordinating to combine our resources for mutual benefit. Now, what are the resources of the privileged and what's their benefit? Okay, let's take a couple of seconds to think about it. You can talk amongst yourselves.
I think they're getting it.
Wait, is this a takeover?
Yeah, I guess
Say it.
so.
What do you think they're saying?
Don't worry about it, girl. You got this.
So, did anyone come up with anything?
Yeah, I'm bored. I think I know all of this stuff already.
I understand that some of you may have learned this before, but
I took Latin in college.
I think that we need to make sure everyone is on the same page and we're all
And you're pronouncing it wrong. It's alley.
okay. Thank you. We're going to come back to this teachable moment later, but for now, let's get back on topic.
Oh my God, you look Latin too. Carpe diem.
Hey, you.
Tamika,
I have a benefit.
Great. Let's hear it.
Black people have the privilege to wear their hair however they want. When I wear my hair like this, I feel ostracized.
Hmm.
Whoa, calm down.
You're making me feel very threatened.
Manspreader goes to comfort her.
I thought this was supposed to be a safe space.
Tamika clenches her hands. Woman lets out a gasp. Goes to shield herself. The white men shield her.
Thank you.
this is not a safe space for your white feelings. This is a place for learning and growth and
See,
and
she doesn't even know what she's talking about. Like, how is she supposed to be a good teacher when she can't even control her feelings and use common logic?
I feel so unsafe right now. I deserve better. Allies matter. Allies matter.
Matter.
Allies
Allies
matter.
matter. Allies matter.
Allies matter.
They march off the stage chanting,
I think that went well, don't you?
I'm gonna burn everything down.
"End." Thank you to our wonderful artists, including playwright Mieko Gavia and all of our actors, Donnell Cole-Price, Ekemini Ekpo, Tim Craig, and Jyreika Guest. The last piece of the evening, called Military Justice, features Tim Craig as General Barnes, Mieko Gavia as Nisa, and Ekemini Ekpo as stage directions.
Military Justice by H. Harvey. Two men drag Nisa Daniels onto a chair. General Barnes splashes water on her face.
Time to join the living, Private.
General Barnes. General Barnes.
Private Daniels, you will speak when spoken to. I have enough questions to keep your mouth busy, so try not to get started too early.
The men nearby laugh.
Based on preliminary forensic and witness evidence, I will be recommending court-martial. Today's proceeding may or may not impact the charges levied against you. Do you understand?
But General.
Private Daniels, do you understand the proceedings as I have explained them to you?
Yes.
Did you kill Second Lieutenant Kyle Martin?
He was attacking me.
Yes or no answer will suffice, Private. This isn't court. This is simply an effort to gather evidence.
Yes.
Yes, you killed Second Lieutenant Kyle Martin.
Yes, sir.
And immediately prior to the commission of this crime, did you or did you not engage in a sexual act with Second Lieutenant Kyle Martin?
No.
Did you attempt sexual contact with Second Lieutenant Kyle Martin?
No, sir.
That's interesting, Private. I have no less than 10 separate witnesses' accounts that describe your attempts to seduce Second Lieutenant Martin within a few hours of your discovery.
It's not true.
Did I ask a question, Private?
No.
Have you ever had sex with Second Lieutenant Martin?
Yes.
Were you aware that he was married at the time?
Yes.
So you knowingly committed adultery in direct violation to the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Yes, sir.
When you had sex with Second Lieutenant Kyle Martin, what took place?
We were intoxicated, sir. I barely
Did you
remember.
kiss him?
Yes.
Did you undress yourself or Second Lieutenant Martin?
Yes.
Did you perform oral sex?
Yes.
How wide did you open your mouth during the commission of oral sex, Private?
What?
What is not a unit of measurement in which I am familiar, Private?
I'm not sure.
I can grab a ruler and put on some gloves and open your mouth for you, or you can show me a decent estimate.
Nisa opens her mouth. General Barnes snaps his fingers. Another man steps forward with a ruler and measures. He records.
Did you perform vaginal intercourse?
Yes.
For how long?
I don't know. Not
Did
long.
you perform anal intercourse?
No.
Did you use your hands to stimulate Second Lieutenant Martin?
Yes.
Did you make Second Lieutenant Martin ejaculate?
Yes.
Where did he ejaculate?
In a condom.
Where do you keep condoms, Private?
I don't have any. He had them.
Why would a married man keep condoms while serving his country away from his wife?
Perhaps he didn't intend to stay faithful to her.
Oh, perhaps that you are lying.
No.
Did you provide the condom?
No, sir.
Did you request Second Lieutenant Martin provide a condom?
No.
Did you promise sex in exchange for his procuring a condom?
No.
Did you tell Second Lieutenant Martin to get the condom?
I didn't tell him.
Where?
I don't know where he got it.
Let me make something clear to you, Private. You will be going to court-martial for your offenses. You will make right of the crimes you've committed. This will be a difficult journey for you, Private. Do not compound your mistakes by yelling at a senior officer.
End.
I want to thank all of our amazing artists before we transition to the community conversation section. And again, our artists this evening included Donnell Cole-Price, Ekemini Ekpo, Tim Craig, Mieko Gavia, Jyreika Guest, and artists that you're not even seeing, Kira DeCoudre and Meredith King. And before we transition to the community conversation, I just want to invite for any artists who want to stay on for the conversation, all are welcome to stay. And of course, you will be paid for your time and intellectual labor. If you would like to exit before the end of the community conversation, this is probably the best time to take your leave. Great. So I want to go around. It's been an interesting time in the kind of mass media conversation around CRT, and I would feel very comfortable in saying the propaganda and disinformation regarding CRT. I'm curious when you all first heard of critical race theory and the context in which you heard it. And I'll just kind of popcorn around based on the weird location of little Zoom cubes in my world over here, starting with Mieko.
I didn't hear about critical race theory really until college. I was like, I did a lot of like trainings. I was part of a co-op, and I was coordinator. I don't even remember the name of this position I was in the co-op, but I was essentially there. I think it was like accessibility coordinator or something. So I was there to like make sure that the dining cooperative that I was part of in college was a welcoming environment for all people. And so some of my training dealt with, disability justice, especially like food, like activism around food and what people can eat and food sensitivities. And then some of my training dealt with like race. And that's when the term CRT was first introduced to me.
Great. Tim, can you talk about your first exposure to CRT?
Ooh, well, yes, I can. I think I started to understand what it was labeling in college. I think that was the first time I've heard the concept in that regard. I think still kind of learning more about it and understanding that it's more pertaining to historical of law, particularly criminal law, as it's kind of progressed in the nation, and understanding that more. And speaking to people who work in that, speaking to lawyers, people who work in the criminal justice field, and understanding the minutia and the nuance of CRT. But I think I first heard it studying in college in an African American studies class, actually. But I think that so much legislation from where I'm from, which is the state of Alabama and Birmingham, so much of the legislation that was being pushed was just all, based on, Black existence and Black life, pushing back on the legislation that was being created to reduce that. And so it wasn't giving the label. I don't know if it was, I had no idea, and this is what this conversation is about, if it was given that label in the 60s, but it's certainly something that has evolved in my life personally. But has always been going, the civic rights legislation is based on CRT, literally. So I'm learning about it every single day, just like we all are.
Jyreika, could you share your first exposure to CRT?
Interesting enough, like again, I have to also I relate to Tim as well. In undergrad, that just wasn't something, it wasn't labeled that way. I would say honestly, within like the last 3 to 5 years, it's come up, like the labeling of CRT, right? But the topic around like how it's been how there's been backlash about it within like the last, I would say, yeah, within like the last like 5 years have I seen like, oh, like we can't have this cultural shock before undergrad. So critical race theory is not something that was or is, exhibited or taught on the high school level, or even like areas, right? And like on the middle school level, it's like, we don't talk about that. It's just, and I feel like I'm like, man, I'm really a millennial, because I feel like I'm like, yeah, that's just, it wasn't of a topic of discussion at all. It's just like what you experience. And then depending upon the college you went to, we delved into the topic. We had that one Black professor who, kind of pushed the envelope and told you what was real and was prolific because he was that only one that did that. But to even take it on a high school level, like being from Kentucky, I know that it wasn't going to be pressed because people were uncomfortable, white people particularly, and very passive and comfortable, safe. Black people were okay with it not being of discussion because that meant we had to actually dismantle something, and that was we had to dismantle many different systems and question our peers. And so it's something that I feel like is such a growing thing, and I find it fascinating that there is it's fascinating but not surprising, the backlash or the pushback.
And Ekemini, if you could share your first exposure to CRT.
Yeah. So I'm from Texas, so there's a lot of like Southern representation in this group. But yeah, I guess my first exposure was probably college, even though in college it wasn't framed that way. Like we learned a lot of like the theoretical frameworks, but if anyone ever said the phrase critical race theory, it was like in passing. Um, so the moment in which this phrase became a part of my conscious awareness was uh, simultaneous with it being like this thing that there was apparently a lot of backlash around.
Yeah, similar to what I think many of you have touched on, my first exposure to CRT was also in college. Um, and it was actually through reading Kimberly Crenshaw and Patricia Hill Collins, some of these kind of embattled thinkers right now. And I felt like I got a pretty clear introduction to it, possibly as a course of my academic studies in Africana studies. But I find it fascinating, this like theater of outrage that the right is just demanding we all participate in. It's 1000% farce. And I think one of the beautiful things that we can do as BRTW is just point to when a social shift, some manifestation in the zeitgeist is just bullshit. And this outrage against CRT right now is just bullshit. And I feel very like okay saying that for a couple of reasons. One, as Jyreika so clearly stated, CRT is not being introduced in K-12 curricula. We just had an education expert, Mr. Gavia, come on in November, October. Check our website. And apparently we will too. We just had an education expert come on for Melanated Mondays and address this very concern. There is no CRT introduction in K-12 curricula. Part of that might be because of the conservative bedrock that we're constantly kowtowing to in our education. Part of that might be because name a theoretical framework you were introduced to in K-12. I'll double down on that as someone who went to a high school that didn't have AP, that didn't have, baccalaureate access. Did we know what a theoretical framework was? And that's also fine. It is okay to be able to graduate from high school and not have access to the minutia of certain, theoretical frameworks. But the problem is, in a country where 40 to 60% of working adults, depending upon your background, social access, race, et cetera, only have a high school education. And we're talking about something that is as academically embroiled as a theoretical framework that most people only receive an in-depth understanding of if they are pursuing a JD. Why the fuck are we taking time to complain about it in K-12 curricula We have teachers who are getting fired about this. We have schools that are banning books. People are talking about bringing back book burnings. So the reason why we are kind of revisiting a conversation that got some shine already in an earlier Melanated Mondays is because CRT as a dedicated conversation needs to be teased out from what it's been misrepresented as. So I named a couple of names: Kimberly Crenshaw, who I think many of us are familiar with as a well-regarded Black woman law scholar. She's most often named as the person who coined the term critical race theory, who coined the term intersectionality. Both concepts existed before that specific articulation. And I'm not saying that to take any shine away from Kimberly Crenshaw. She absolutely deserves her flowers. But as Black people participating in an intellectual legacy, it's important for us to also make sure our flowers get to our forebears. And in this case, that includes Professor Derek Bell, the person who's considered the godfather of critical race theory, whose pioneering work in the 1960s, as Tim Craig mentioned earlier, was crucial to civil rights legislation. And as far as intersectionality, if you've been following BRTW for a while, I hope you're so tired of hearing this. This is going to be a name check for the Combahee River Collective, who coined the term overlapping oppressions. And that is essentially intersectionality. Kimberly Crenshaw, as a law scholar, articulated what was originally understood as overlapping oppressions in a framework that could be applied with the power of the law. Whereas the Combahee River Collective included people like Audre Lorde. It included people that were, poets and journalists and doing really important, powerful work who were advancing this kind of social movement. But as a theoretical framework, it stayed very much in what would become Africana studies. The impact that Kimberly Crenshaw made in articulating these things in these particular ways were amazing advances to legal practice that frankly were not considered all that controversial. These are articulations that occurred in the early 90s. I was a single digit when Kimberly Crenshaw was making these advances, and yet somehow we mad now. So with that kind of protracted preamble, I want to turn it over to Mieko about some of the pieces that were included in this month's Melanated Mondays. Can you talk about why you included the piece that you included, how it related to CRT, and what message you were hoping audiences would walk away with?
Yeah, Allies Matter is like very loosely based on the kind of conversations that I had in college around these kinds of things, and the kind of conversations that I have, in my working world today. I'm going through DEI training right now. It's part of my job. Excuse me. So yeah, it's based around a lot of these conversations that we have, and a lot of the ways that people try to teach concepts like critical race theory, and even like beginner concepts like privilege and oppression, the building blocks before you even get to race and the law, and how those conversations can really go wrong, and how easy those conversations are to get derailed even by well-meaning people. So that's why I decided to include it, because I was just like, I wrote this a while ago when I was just very tired of these same kind of conversations happening over and over and over again.
Yeah, I love that you included some of those dynamics. And I think, everyone here probably knows this, and some folks who've been following BRTW for a while might know that part of my work outside of BRTW is in facilitation, usually around anti-oppressive work. And so that moment when Tamika just screams is like basically the drumbeat of my soul at this point. But I also love that it shows this interesting thing that's been happening especially in New York for the past like 5 years, when you find people who are still fundamentally as problematic as they were before they learned whatever the word du jour was. Like you have people who are effectively using language around like gender, race, sexuality, identity, oppression, oppressor, you know, the oppressed dynamics. They understand what marginalization is, but like they're still the problem.
Yeah, like I went through a specific there I remember very clearly this one incident I had in college where we were talking about I don't remember if it was like conditional privilege or something about like being in certain spaces, and this one white person said that when she was in a space of black people, she didn't have conditional privilege because she was a minority. And I was like, that's not exactly how it works. And we ran out of time before I could just really like get in there and really explain it. But it was one of those moments that really just stuck with me. I'm like, wow, people think that, and that happened too when I was studying. I studied abroad in Japan for a semester, and there was a real thing of like white people going to from majority white countries coming to a majority non-white country for the first time and feeling that they were, a numeric minority for one thing, and that they would receive certain types of attention. Sometimes it would be positive attention, sometimes it would be negative attention, but they felt particularly oppressed in a way that was not the same as a a black and Japanese person felt, in the country of my grandmother. It's a very different type of of marginalization, and uh, people look at you differently. People treat you differently. People, you know, like the stereotype was that foreigners steal, but like they're much more likely to believe that I was a thief rather than a white person. So
Before we move on to any other pieces, I just want to make sure that the space is open to Tim, Ekemini, and Jyreika if you have any thoughts about Allies Matter.
It is one that like it's so funny. It made me think of my survival job at the beginning of this pandemic when I worked for a reentry program, and majority of those that were like volunteers, like I was hired to be the program coordinator. And I was the only black person of color and black person in the organization, which at first I was like, at first it didn't alarm me. And maybe it was because it was a survival job. And I was like, I'm going to change some things. And then I was like, no, I can't be the magical Negro here. Like, I was like, oh, y'all need this. And it hurt because I was amongst those, and these volunteers, they were former retired U of C, University of Chicago academia and lab school. So they had, tenure and relationship and contact. And so like they had the pretentious air about them to work with participants who were Black and brown. And I remember talking to them about that. And I was like, y'all don't see how the optics already cause a problem? And I remember like they immediately were like, yeah, well, actually, because I'm reading this book right now. It was just like, boom, 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 like all the rhetoric that I'm like, this, it was alarming because I was like, I am around, younger white liberals that like have like these things like these, they have these buzzwords just right off. And to also kind of experience and be in the room with those in academia and to know, it was like, goodness gracious, there's going to be generations and generations and work. Like, this is going to take a while, just because like they were preaching the same thing, but they were also preaching it in a point of like, well, since I've read this book, I know it now. It's locked in and I've done the job. And it's like, that was the thing when we had a group, two Black women who came in and they were the DEI trainers. Cause I was like, I'm not recruiting anybody new into this organization to volunteer until you have this workshop. And they had it. And even the concept of like an experience or a truth, like your truth is not the same as somebody else's truth. That concept alone for them was mind blowing. And they were like, no, my truth is the one that my truth is truth. I think I froze. Did I freeze? Can you all still see me?
Yeah, your video froze, but I'm hearing you just fine.
Yeah, the idea that even truth, I was like, that it really stuck with me. And I only stayed like legit, y'all, like 9 months, because I was like, I can't even do my job. I don't want to do this job. Like, and I felt like me supporting that. And even though I started to do I felt like I was doing the work of like, you know what, y'all need this training, maybe think about that, maybe I was just like, at a point you have to like let people really crumble, because if they are willing to do the work, they're going to do the work. And if they're willing to not, then we'll see how the, cards fall. But it was something that really alarmed me in that experience, and just how like allyship is such a easy word to use. And it's unfortunate that like it's still so popular to any and everybody, as far as white people, to use and not do any actual work. And it's like the work is the painful work. The work is the checking and privilege. Like, maybe if it were more tangible, I don't know, but it just it burns me whenever I think about that experience, and just how much work it's going to take. And the fact that like, yes, I can tell people that I am not going to do all of it, but I also know that I'm like, I have to participate in the work, because it's ongoing. Yeah, so that's my story about allies and generational allyship. And I don't know what's happening to my video. Sorry.
Thanks for sharing that. Hopefully we can help figure out the tech side of things. But in the meantime, I want to turn it over to Ekemini. It looks like you have something to share.
Yeah, I I guess reading today, it felt kind of like, man, Tamika's going into like the lion's den, because even though she's like she isn't ostensibly in a position of authority, she's like co-leading this workshop. She's like she's still like the only Black person there, and and just it's like just exhausting to imagine like the idea of having to put like bringing white people along into racial consciousness on your back, um, as you continue to experience racism. And something Jyreika said actually really resonated with me, and thinking about like the fact that people can read all these things and then still be problematic at the end. And it's because I think like you, people don't like internalize their values and then let them inform how they treat other people. Like it's like you're like if you're living, like there would be no problem if you're just living your values, but it's like this accumulation of like intellectual knowledge that isn't put into practice in any way. So yeah, like ally isn't really in my vocabulary unless I'm trying to be insulting, or I'm trying to poke fun or something. um, I like the idea of being in solidarity with others way more than I like the idea of being an ally.
Thanks for that. Tim, did you want to share some thoughts?
Oh, I'm good. I thank Miyako for her lovely writing. I think that it reveals a lot in these situations. It always comes up, and I just think that I think Miyako mentioned that she had written it a long time ago, but it's happening today, yesterday, every day, and tomorrow. I think that's all I have.
Thanks for that. And before we move on to the other pieces, Ekemini, I love that you brought up um, how we're using ally. I don't know too many Black people who take the word ally very seriously anymore. I remember being a freshman in college and having the word ally being introduced to me by excited white people. And I have never gotten past that moment. It was just like, it was very much like two 20-year-old white people being like, I'm going to demonstrate to you, person whose color I have learned that it's important to recognize that I see you, I see your heritage, I see your color, I'm your ally. That means that we're friends, and that if you hurt my feelings, my white fragility will be the most dominant thing to have ever happened in your existence, bitch, until I read a book by a white woman in 2020. That said, white people, by all means, do read my good sis, Robin DiAngelo. Like, y'all do need to get over white fragility. Tim is fully out right now. But it also shouldn't take a white woman to validate the point that many Black people have been making for a while. And I've noticed that there has been a lot of really important work around rallying white people in particular around, I don't want an ally, I want an accomplice. I don't want an ally, I want a comrade. And I think a number of us have been feeling some internal fear about what happens when that same energy is applied to the person who says that they're an accomplice, when you're not really ready to do accomplished shit. If somebody text messages me and is like, hey, I'm an accomplice, what we doing? I'm like, we burning shit down. Don't let me be the one burning shit down by myself. That's not accomplice behavior. That's the same thing. So the other two pieces, I'm gonna kind of lump in my intro to both at the same time because I'm lazy. Both Madonna Horror and Military Justice come from a piece that Mieko was also involved in developing years ago. And we kind of have an internal joke in BRTW about our commissions, that this particular piece is the one that we don't tell people about. It's like, you can ask for it. And if you ask for it, then we'll of course produce it. The piece is called Fruit, and it was us dealing with toxic masculinity and rape culture. And we were writing this piece in 2015, before Trump announced his candidacy for presidency. And then it became even more topical. And so we had to do it more and more often and keep having the same discussions and realize that the world just wasn't making progress. And so it just became intellectually painful. Also, I'm gonna apologize to audiences. My dog wants attention, so he's a secret guest performer right now. But the piece Madonna Horror features a dynamic that actually exists not only in academia, but also my industry as nonprofit. Many of us, once we get into the C-suite and beyond, we might have to sign something called a morals clause. And morals clauses are theoretically in existence to protect an institution if someone commits an offense that is not traditionally fireable, but diminishes the brand of that organization. And when we hear a definition like that, we might think, if R. Kelly was a department director at a major university, one might use a morals clause to fire him. No, that's not what's in the morals clause. Morals clauses have been used disproportionately against women, disproportionately against queer people, and in both of those buckets, disproportionately against people of color, to fire people because they are in non-traditional arrangements, because they express themselves in ways that somehow run counter to the orthodoxy. Those of us who like to follow the TikTok tea might remember that a couple weeks ago, A young person who is in the midst of transitioning was just told that as part of signing their employment contract, they signed a morals clause, which included a clause about presentation of a cisgender assumed gender expression. That is legal in these United States. And of course, this morals clause was implied to be about sexual conduct, not releasing sex tapes, which is inherently anti-sex work, amongst other things. The other piece in here, military justice, also deals sadly with some real life events, and that one, adultery is still taken somewhat seriously in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It might be swept under the rug, but there are people that, for whatever reason, couldn't get ousted out of the military. And then for whatever reason, adultery is the thing that did them in. The other aspect of this, though, is that sexual assault is extremely prevalent in the military. In fact, one of our previous guest speakers, Kyla Moore, who's a lawyer who specializes in pro bono relations, specifically for liberation frameworks in service of under-resourced communities, wrote a primary source thesis that is still being cited to this day, almost 10 years ago now, doing breakthrough research about the experiences of Black women in the military. And I don't have the figures with me at this particular moment, but the vast majority of Black women in the military, certainly that she got to interview, and they were a pretty representative distribution, had experienced some form of sexual assault while in service. And a number of them in their experiences sadly knew that people who should have been there to protect them knew about their experiences and used those experiences against them, because the fear was less about applying justice and more about tarnishing the military. So both of those ended up relating to CRT from some different angles. One, the unique experiences of Black women being this intersection of misogyny and racism. But two, they both have to do with how we still have not gotten to a point in the United States where we can accept that a Black woman has the right to be in full agency of her own sexuality, regardless of what her sexual expression is, regardless of what she's doing, how she makes her money, who she's attracted to, who she's not attracted to. We have so deeply normalized the idea of either the hypersexual or the completely desexualized Black woman that any healthy expression of self-possessed sexuality in a Black woman's life seems to be just up for scrutiny. And if we don't like any aspect about it, she can be completely disempowered, oftentimes with the weight of the law behind that vehicle of disempowerment. So at that, I would love to invite anyone who has any thoughts about that.
I think one of the things that resonated with that particular piece is, I think, Wardell's line, "This clause is 200 years old." And so it just speaks to how long and how, we uphold these sensibilities and why. That's all.
Your talk about morals clauses, it reminded me that there is something, I don't know how much this has progressed, but I was a literary assistant at a literary agency back before the pandemic. So like 2018 into early 2019, I think. And around that time, that was around the time when Milo Yiannopoulos, he was going to come out with that book, and then there was this big scandal around something he did, and he lost that book contract. He lost that book contract because of something very similar to a morals clause. And those clauses seem to gain, like there was a sharp increase in popularity in them in writers' contracts. And while on the one hand you could see it as good, where it would like pull books like Milo Yiannopoulos' and certain like far right fundamentalist books from shelves. Like the reality of that is that, and I was talking to one of my agent friends, Susan Graham, great person, um, friend of the group, um, about how Susan was worried that these morality type clauses would eventually blow back on marginalized writers, because like what if, especially now, in atmospheres where books are getting banned because of like CRT, like a book that has queer content or content that's content about Black people, like discussing racism, like those books could be pulled because the author might say something on Twitter that might go against whatever definition of the morality clause is in there. So it's one of those things that while it may initially be thought of as the knife cuts both ways, it's one of those things where the tide can very quickly turn to blow back against marginalized people, like Heather was talking about. So it's not just in traditional modes of employment, it's in non-traditional modes of employment, it's in the arts, it's in all sorts of different places. um yeah.
Yeah, I really love that you made that point about how it can be weaponized disproportionately against marginalized folks, because I think one thing that a lot of people might not know the first time they're presented with a morals clause is that, when you're getting onboarded for a job, you're kind of handed a stack of paper. And that stack of paper is now this sword of Damocles representing whether or not you actually get paid. And as you're going through this stack of paper, I don't know if you read all of it. I'm not going to throw any shade, anyway on that. But the morals clause rarely actually has to do with how anyone in that organization really feels about you or your behavior. It might have something to do with how the board of directors feels about you and your behavior, but more often than not, it's a safety net for if you become a brand liability. The Milo Yiannopoulos example, I think, is an excellent one, because Milo Yiannopoulos had that book deal for weeks after his racism was so extreme on Twitter that, if I remember correctly, people like Roxanne Gay were shouting him down. I'm like, this dude was almost universally derided. That's where morality clauses are most often used. It's to clean up a mess. And so when it's used against people of color, it's often the emergency safety hatch to avoid taking a stand when an organization doesn't have the backbone, doesn't have the will, or doesn't have the incentive to be progressive enough. Case in point, think of the number of organizations that over the past couple of years have scapegoated sex workers. I think many of these organizations would love to align themselves with progressive values, would probably on the surface like to say something like sex workers deserve rights. But then if MasterCard and Visa puts pressure on them, who becomes very vocally and clearly anti-sex work? We're not anti-sex work. We're just conveniently throwing all sex workers under the bus. That's one of the ways that morality clauses get weaponized against people. Before we close out for the evening, I want to just make space for any final thoughts about CRT, especially in the wake of kind of press of the past year, that if you just had a wish that you could, snap your fingers and know that this aspect of CRT was made clear to people around this country. I said that and instantly saw Ekemini's face, and it was like the perfect, I was like the perfect Ooh, if only I did child face. Like it's like 5 blinks, a full forehead back. It was great.
You know, I'm gonna say something, and it might be controversial. Like CRT is not taught in schools, but I kind of want it to be. Um, I know that there's like so much that you that's not really age appropriate for children to learn. Like it's not gonna like land with them. It's not gonna be conceptualized, um, really until you're an adult. But I feel like a lot of the frameworks that people could teach can be age appropriate. Um, and like a lot of the history lessons that we learn can be um, contextualized in a way that they're not at the moment. I don't. So, so it's not like. So it wouldn't actually be critical race theory. It would just be a lot more priming people for that idea when they're ready, I guess. And I think that, I think that I was primed for that idea when I was ready in college. But a lot of, because like I went to a school where we talked about like, you know, certain policies happen to certain people. And then we read books from those perspectives. Like, for example, like the history of the 80th anniversary of Japanese internment was yesterday. And I remember reading a book in elementary school that was from the perspective of a boy who was interned. And then we got to write a book uh, that was like first person diary perspective, like after that. Um, so it didn't have to be about, it wasn't about that, but it was like a similar type of, we were learning about first person perspective writing. But, if we had learning things about like putting yourself in another person's shoes, learning things about how you learn about certain policies, and then you are allowed to like look at whether or not this policy was fair. These are the types of things that can help people build those building blocks of when they want, if they want to pursue higher education, CRT will be there for them to further analyze that. And if they don't want to pursue higher education or don't want to pursue CRT, then they're more primed to understand its effects in everyday life, I guess. So yeah, people are like complaining about critical race theory and that it is in schools, and I'm like, it's not, but I would kind of like it to be. Me personally. I don't have any power, so don't get mad at me. I don't have any power to put it in school, so don't write BRTW angry emails that we're like CRT demons, because it's not happening. But yeah.
Uh, I gotta try to keep this short, and I don't even know if I'm gonna answer your question, Heather. I'm gonna try. I think it's so. I don't know if the word is minute. I know that we're experiencing CRT from an educational level, and that's where a lot of the conversation is around. And it is a lot of conversation with the K through 12. Of course, I feel like it should be taught. I mean, so many ways, but on top of it should being taught, it's expounded upon. I think that it's a national issue, a conversation right now. But there's be so many licensing I would love to. These kids these days are learning so many different ways, and a lot of the ways they're learning is through audio, podcasts, things of that nature, and also like video games. And so, being able to educate and this Oculus mode, and indoctrinating it to like the youth in more creative ways that they gravitate to, might be more effective than trying to come to our local PTA meeting and demand that this white institution begins to to teach about true American history, and try to keep it short in that way. I just think that hopefully we expound on it more.
Honestly, y'all, my head is swimming. Like I don't um yeah, I guess maybe something that I wish the country understood was that um and this I don't even think this is necessarily specific to CRT, but that somebody on Fox News yelling about a supposed issue um, doesn't make it real. And also that uh, finding, 5 tweets where someone says something that might be potentially controversial or provocative is not representative or indicative of like how a whole community of people feels about something. I guess to explain that, I feel like I often see articles about that make some marginalized group out to be unreasonable due to complaining about something that seems on face ridiculous. Um, and then you open the article and it's like 5 tweets, and each person has like 75 followers. And it's like, I don't think this is actually how most people feel. I think you're just trying to delegitimize this group so that when they bring legitimate grievances, they're you say, oh, then they're complain about everything. Um, yeah, I don't really think I answered your question, but that's what we're gonna go with.
I'll be quick. I'll say I would love, like, I agree with Mieko that the idea of like having critical race theory taught on a grade school level, I think it is, and I look at it because I'm like, kids can pick up, like, yes, they're not mature enough to like grapple with all like the the minutia of it. I feel though as if it's of a constant like, all right, so we see this, we've been taught that this block is a block, great, by one person or one group of people, that this is a block. Now we're going to like prismatically like break that open so you can see it from different perspectives, right? And I feel like that might not be the answer. And that's fine. I'm okay with that. I'm not building curricula in that way. But I feel like there's levels, there's ways to like interweave the conversation as kids are becoming more impressionable and asking questions. And I think like if I could snapshot, like see it into the future, is that like we don't immediately shut down the inquisitive minds of kids, when they're asking questions that like have to do directly, because they're ready, they're curiously ready for it, right? Like their minds are ready for it. But at least like if there were just enough resources available for them to be like, it's going to continue to unpack over time. Like, I don't want you to rush through this idea, because this idea is ongoing and it's going to grow as you grow. But that it's not quickly just like put away or disregarded or just dismissed overall, just because we don't want to have that tough conversation. Like, tough conversations are broken down to kids every day in different ways. So I feel like there's ways to kind of do that same thing if we're willing to be imaginative, if we're really willing to like be creative about how to like talk about it, for everyone. But I know that that's also the scary part. Like that's the backlash. It's like, my child's gonna hate that shit. You don't know that. Like that's, you don't, you haven't explored it yet to know if that's not on the table yet. Yeah, that's what I got.
I want to offer an explainer or an addendum, and Mieko and Jyreika, feel free to chime in if this feels at all misrepresentative. I think for folks for whom CRT is very new, being first exposed to critical race theory, one, understanding it as a theoretical framework, which is used largely through civil rights, Africana studies, legal studies, and that it's a kind of like a subset of critical theory that, it arose out of all these different things, intersectionality, et cetera. I think the vastness of the intellectual heritage can feel inaccessible for younger minds. And so what I'd like to do is invite people to think about some of the tenets of critical race theory. And I don't mean like the 5 classical tenets that people often point to, but also some of those. Like the first tenet of critical race theory is that race is not a biological truism, but a social construct. Another tenet of critical race theory is that legislation and legal rulings have acted in favor of white privilege. And I think these are things that we can effectively communicate to children and have effectively been incorporated in anti-racist curricula. So am I correct in like that approach to this distillation, that it's less so about like the kind of like the classical education of critical race theory and more of here are aspects of critical race theory that can be reasonably made accessible to children in K-12 curricula?
Yeah.
Cool. Before we close out, traditionally we have kind of like action items that folks can take to civically engage with this concept. And there are a couple things I want to share before I do that. First, there is a February 4th, 2022 survey from the New Yorker. Survey, what exactly is CRT, that takes several tweets and shows what people think. And I wasn't surprised, and I hope you won't be either. Next, there's a New York Times article that I think is actually useful. And this one came out November 8th, 2021. So a few months ago. It's by J.C. Fortin. It quotes Kimberly Crenshaw and Dr. Mary Matsuda. It also includes some pretty good references to Professor Derek Bell. The quote I want to share here is from Professor Mary Matsuda. For me, she said, critical race theory is a method that takes the lived experience of racism seriously, using history and social reality to explain how racism operates in American law and culture toward the end of eliminating the harmful effects of racism and bringing about a just and healthy world for all. That kind of inspires the action item for today, which is that many of us are not lawyers. Many of us are not professors. And so it might seem daunting, like how can my civic engagement incorporate any sort of service within this theoretical framework, service to this theoretical framework? And I think one thing that we can do is deeply inspired by both Mieko and Jyreika's approach to the question about a wish for the country, which is CRT takes seriously the lived experience of racism. Taking seriously the lived experience of racism means putting your ego and righteousness aside. And when I'm saying you, I am talking to white people. And if you are thinking not me, yes, I'm talking to you. Anytime the DEI workshop comes along and the Black person groans and the excited white person goes, shouldn't you be excited about that? That's a microaggression. Anytime a Black person is at their wits' end because they've experienced the compiled events of racism, sexism, homophobia, whatever their intersectional experience may be, and it adds up and adds up and adds up, this is not the time for you, well-meaning ally, to swoop in and reduce any aspect of their experience. And that reduction can happen in a lot of ways. It's not just saying, I don't think it happens like that, which absolutely is reduction and absolutely is a microaggression, but it can also be playing devil's advocate. It can also be, well, have you thought about it from their experience? Have you thought about it from their perspective? It can be, well, that's just how it is. These levels of dismissiveness are thought terminating cliches that normalize power structures that say to every Black person in your orbit, your right to freedom, your right to liberation, your right to comfort is not as important or serious as mine. So if we're taking the lived experience of racism seriously, that means regardless of how much work you've done to read the right book, go to the right march, post the right social media content, stream the right Insta story, have the right language, it means recognizing that we are all continually improving. That is a fundamental orientation to take with you. As Ekemini pointed out earlier, this isn't just about the language, this is about the practice. And you don't get to pat yourself on the back because you did the practice. The practice just is the practice. The other bit of civic engagement that I would like to invite folks to is anytime you hear an angry politician yelling about CRT, that's a racist dog whistle. I can't tell you not to vote for them because BRTW is in the process of becoming a 501c3, but I can phrase it like that. Would anyone like to share anything before we close out for the evening? All right, with that, please support BRTW. We're on the interwebs at thebrtw.org. You can hit us up on the social medias. Oh, the social medias. We're on Facebook at Black Revolutionary Theater Workshop. We're on Twitter and Instagram at the BRTW. We're on all the podcatchers. And apparently y'all listen on the podcatchers and we never talk about being on the podcatchers. Thank you. But we're on Apple and Audible and other ones, Google Podcasts and whatever your favorite one is. We're on there as Black Revolutionary Media. We are also on Venmo at the BRTW because we pay Black artists, and in order to do that, we need money. So please feel invited to support us.
We're also on Patreon at patreon.com/Black Revolutionary Media.
Did I forget anything else?
A very happy Black History Month to everyone on this call and everyone viewing.
Yes.
Thank you. And with that, I also want to thank the organizations that are supporting Black Revolutionary Theater Workshop in 2022. Those include and are not limited to Brooklyn Arts Council, Art New York, and Black Arts Futures Fund. Thank you all and enjoy your evening.